Well, I want you to think with me for a second. With all that you are, I want you to think about who you are and everything that you have. So who you are, whether you're a student, whether you're an attorney, whether you're a teacher, whether you are a parent. I want to think about all the hats that you wear, and then all the things that you have, your car, your home, your bank account, everything that you are and everything that you have. I want you to just process that in your head right now. Everything that you are and everything that you have. And imagine this afternoon, Jesus shows up to your house, knocks on your door, and he wants to evaluate you on how well of a job you're doing in each of the roles that you have and in all the things that you possess. How would you do? If you were to be evaluated today as a spouse, if you were to be evaluated today as a student, if you were to be evaluated today as an employer or an employee, as a younger sister, as a big auntie, if you were to be evaluated today based off of who you are and also all that you have, how would you do? Last week, we looked at the essential of the kingdom, and we said that the kingdom is the reign of God through the people of God over the place of God. And today, the question we have to ask ourselves is, if God is the king, if God is reigning and ruling over all, what does that make us? And the answer from Matthew 25 is not owners, but stewards. We are stewards of all that he's entrusted into us. And the big idea for today is simply this, that we are not owners, but stewards. The way you understand rightly how you should manage all that you have is when you understand who the true owner is and what your responsibility is as the steward and as the manager. The question that this passage is asking us today is, what are you doing with what you've been given? What are you doing with what you have been given? In Matthew 25, for the brief time that we have, we're going to look at three things as it relates to stewardship. First, we're going to look at the trust of stewardship. Second, we're going to look at the the development of stewardship. And then finally, the reward of stewardship. So we're going to look at the trust of stewardship. We're going to look at the development of stewardship. And then we'll end by looking at the reward of stewardship. Verses 14 and 15, Jesus says this, "For it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted to them his property. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away." If you have one of those red letter Bibles, then the chapter 25 in Matthew's gospel is just bleeding and hemorrhaging over the page because the whole chapter is all red. Because Jesus is speaking throughout the entire chapter. There are 3 separate parables in Matthew 25. The parable of the 10 virgins, the parable of the talents, which we're looking at today, and the parable of the final judgment, or depending on your background, the parable of the sheep and the goats. And the whole idea of Matthew 25 is the question that the chapter is asking is, when Jesus comes back, when Jesus returns, how should we be waiting? What should we be doing in the interim as we're waiting and preparing for his return? And so in the parable of the 10 virgins, the first parable of Matthew 25, the answer is the way that we should be living our lives as we wait our Savior's return is we should wait while being prepared. If you remember that parable, you can read it on your own later, but the whole big idea from that parable is that those who were prepared and ready for the bridegroom, they were the ones who experienced his blessing. In other words, the big idea of that parable is if you stay ready, you never got to get ready. And the latter parable, the one at the end, the parable of the final judgment, where Jesus is talking about separating the sheep and the goats, the big idea and the question is, okay, Jesus, how are we supposed to wait on you as we wait upon your return? And his emphasis there is look after the poor and look after the least of these, those who are marginalized. And so he would say, wait by being prepared and trusting. Wait by caring for the least of these and the poor. And in our time today, in the parable of the talents, the answer to the question of Jesus, how should we wait as we are eagerly expecting your return? His answer is to maximize everything that I have given you so that when I return, I find it better than when I gave it to you. In other words, stewardship. Part of the way we wait on our Master's return and our Savior's return is by growing, developing, and understanding what true biblical stewardship is. The whole idea of the call to worship today that wasn't on your bulletin, but came out of Psalm 24, says, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. And the big idea there is God owns everything. It all belongs to him. He owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. If God was ever in need, which he would never be, he wouldn't ask you for anything because he has it all. And the idea there is because he's the owner, our response and our attitude to all that he's entrusted to us, to all that he's given to us, is that we are stewards. We are managing his resources. We are simply just caretaking, overseeing, managing all that he's entrusted into us. And so he begins this parable by telling us that in verses 14 and 15, a man went on a journey and he entrusted his property into 3 different servants. To one, he entrusted 5 talents. To another, he entrusted 2. To another, he entrusted 1. In the ancient world, a talent was essentially a measure of weight. It wasn't just a currency. It was more than that. It was a measurement of money, and basically 1 talent was essentially a 20 years worth of labor or wages for somebody that was working. So the idea there is that this owner, this master, who is depicted as God in the story, in the parable, he's very generous because he doesn't have to give any of the servants anything at all. He is not obligated to give or duty-bound to give anyone anything, and yet he gives each of the servants something different based upon, and this is the important part, he says, based upon their ability. So what is he communicating? This isn't blind trust. Anytime God gives you anything, there's an exchange of trust, but it's not blind trust. How do we know this isn't blind trust? Because he says he gives to each servant according to their ability. Then he went away. Oftentimes for Christians, that's very difficult to understand because we think that God should give us stuff based upon what we deserve or what we're entitled to or based upon what other people have. And yet he says, no, in the parable, Jesus says, the master, the owner, he goes to each servant. He says, oh, okay, based upon your ability and your capability, I'm going to give you 5. Based upon your ability and your capability, I'm going to give you 2. And based upon your ability and based upon your capacity, I'm going to give you 1. Now, here's what we don't see. None of the servants look at each other and say, oh, man, how come I got 5 and he got 2? Or how come I got 1 and he got 5? Notice they're not complaining or arguing because they understand they didn't deserve anything. The fact that they got anything from the master at all is a gift. Oftentimes, one of the biggest hindrances to understanding how to operate in stewardship in our lives, and when we're talking about stewardship, even though the parable of the talents is specific, bullseye talking about money, but it's not limited to money, the idea of stewardship is everything. That's why I had you think about all that you have, all that you are. One of the biggest robbers of us being able to be really good stewards is comparison. Nobody in this parable is saying, man, listen, 2 ain't enough. They get what they have based upon their ability. What we do is we say, man, Lord, I know I should be thankful for what you've given me. Like, I'm grateful for my Prius, but I want that Cybertruck. I personally don't want a Cybertruck, man. I done seen them things. I know Elon's running the world, but we may have to rethink. They might look like a tank coming down my street. But or we say, Lord, I'm so grateful that you've allowed me to get my own place. But then you go to your friend's housewarming and you're like, God, this ain't like my place. And God's like, that's funny, because I remember you were praying for the down payment. You were asking me, Lord, give me a realtor that will make a way out of no way, that'll find the best deal in the world. You were fast. The church wasn't even fasting, but you was fasting because you was trying to find you. And then you got blessed with a really great space. And then all of a sudden, you're trying to be a good friend. You go support your homegirl. You bring some wine to the housewoman. And instead of being happy on the inside, you like, God, what about me? And the whole point is, he says he gave it based upon their ability. He says, in other words, I know what you can handle. You can handle this, so I'm going to give you that. Now, I know oftentimes people are like, oh, God would never do this. No. That's exactly what he says in the parable. This person can handle 5, so I'm going to give him 5. This person can handle 2, so I'm going to give him 2. This person can handle one, so I'm going to give them one. One of the issues that we often have is that we think we can handle more than we can actually handle. So then we ask God for it. And instead of us thinking, God, you're being very kind and generous, not giving me what I can't handle, we end up saying, Lord, I deserve this. I earned this. And if you're not going to give it to me, I'm going to get it by any means necessary. And then what ends up happening is exactly the reason why God didn't give it to you in the first place, because he knows you can't handle it. It's like my kids. Lunch, sometimes I make, and you would think, man, I've been parenting for a little bit. You would think that I would understand never, ever never give one of the 4 kids something different for lunch than the others. You would think I would know. My wife said, I could hear her all the way up. Why? Because every time I do something silly like that, a riot happens. So basically, I just be out of mind, like, okay, well, I'm going to give these 3 that, and then I'm going to give this one this. And inevitably, this is what happens. Instead of the 3 saying, oh, man, I'm so grateful for what I have, that Dad prepared this lunch for me, what they end up saying is, how come I don't have what Isaiah has? Isaiah got a banana and I got grapes. How come I don't get what he has? Now, here's what never happens. They never say, oh, good gracious Father, we know you don't have to feed us. Although CPS would be coming for me if I didn't. We know that you're just so kind, and that every time Mom puts in those grocery orders to H-E-B and Kroger and Sam's Club, you have us in mind, and you plan out every single one of our meals, and we're just so thankful that we're even getting anything to eat for lunch. We got friends who don't get 3 meals a day and 2 snacks and dessert on Friday, but you guys are so kind to us that they never say that. What they say is, how come I don't get that? And what the irony is, as they're looking at what they don't have, they can't enjoy what they do have. I know, well, you have some issues going on with your digestive system, so I know you can't handle all of that. That's why I'm giving you this portion. I know this child can handle more, and I know they're probably going to ask for seconds later, so I'm going to go ahead and double up right now. The proportion is based, in my mind, is based on what I know each child can handle, but they don't see it like that. All they see is, I don't get what I want. I see what they have, and I want that. We do the same thing. We do the exact same thing. And stewardship is always a problem because, and even though it's not explicit in the text, it's implicit, we struggle with contentment. Because in order to be a good steward, you also have to be thankful and content with what you have been given. You said, Lord, thank you for what I have. I may not be where I want to be yet in my career, in my financial situation, in my 401k, in my friend group, in my marriage with my kids, but this is where I am right now. And so I'm going to say thank you. And I'm going to learn to manage well what you have given to me before I start clamoring for more. And so he says, he gave them based off of their ability. And part of what this means is that, we have to be people who are radically humble. When you understand, okay, I'm a 5-talent person. Or no, actually, I know exactly, I'm a 2-talent person. That is what Paul calls being sober-minded. When you say, Lord, I know what I can handle. I used to think it was wild reading all these stories about people who win the lottery and the Powerball going broke. I used to think, because I didn't know nothing, I was like, you got anywhere from tens to hundreds of millions of dollars. And I don't care how it comes, lump sum, spread over payments, that's a lot of money. And then every time I would hear, and this isn't like, 1 or 2, this is there's a running list of people who they get it, and then all of a sudden, years later, they have nothing to show for it. And I used to always think, God, that is so silly. That is so stupid. How could they squander millions? I've never even seen that many zeros. And now, I get it all the time. They couldn't handle what they were given. Listen, it doesn't matter what you have. If you can't handle it, you won't have it for long. You should look at it as a gift that the things that God, Even, I remember a friend of mine, after finishing college, he said, I want to make X amount of money and, basically comparable to an attorney. I said, why do you think that's the case? He said, well, I did political science for undergrad. I said, okay, I know most lawyers do poli-sci before they go to law school, but you're forgetting they go to law school. He was just like, well, nah, I really believe I should be able to have that salary coming out of U of H. I said, where did you do that at? Number one, it's okay to say, and he had no intention of going to law school. I said, Doc, have you ever thought about the idea that maybe arguing in a courtroom, being a lawyer, passing the bar, you just don't have that ability? Now, sometimes we tell somebody that, that's like, oh, I can be anything. Stop it. Jesus literally tells us, no, you have certain abilities, and other people have certain abilities. It doesn't matter how fast I think I can run. I'm never going to outsprint Usain Bolt. I may want to, and I may want everything that comes with being at least back then, the world's fastest man, but it doesn't matter how I feel. It matters what abilities I actually have. Oftentimes, one of the biggest things that could, hinder us in our walk with God is we get mad at God because we want to have certain things that come with certain abilities that he never gave us, instead of saying, God, what have you given me? And what capacity and ability do I have? And really working hard at maximizing that, we try to maximize the capacity that we have never had. And then we end up getting mad. And you're like, God, and God's like, you weren't created to be a nuclear physicist. I gave you the ability to be a business owner. But the longer you try to do nuclear physics is the further away you're going to be from actually being a business owner. You think about your ability. That's why it requires sober-mindedness. It requires humility. Man, every time I go into a doctor's office, in my head, I'm always thankful because, one, we see a lot of them just because of all of our kids and everything. I'm just like, man, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. I know I couldn't do it. My parents, I remember going to college, my parents were like, you got 3 options, which as a Nigerian, that's usually